In this episode of Democracy and Education, we're going to talk about a slightly different aspect of democracy and an aspect that, although it's really not a mainstream definition of part of the mainstream definition of democracy, but it can help us to understand what is democracy and how we can identify a system of governance as democracy. Because these days a lot of countries call themselves democratic. We have People's Democratic Republic of North Korea, which a brutal dictatorship uses the word people democracy or people's democratic government in its name. And obviously the Republic of China, the People's Republic of China, when the word people appears in the name of these countries, they are kind of hinting to the fact that these countries have a democratic government. So it's very important, obviously there is a huge difference between the government of France and the government of North Korea, the government of the United States and the government of Islamic Republic. Although all these words representing democracy, such as democratic, democracy, people, and republic, these words are used indiscriminately in the names of some of the most brutal regimes in the world. So it's important that we shed some light and we use our tools in education to understand democracy slightly better, so that we can recognize it when we see it. In the normative democratic theory, really at the heart of the democratic theory is really the moral foundation of democracy, and what based on this moral foundation of democracy that we're going to get to in a minute, and we're going to define it and unpack it, how we can build institutions that will serve the cause of that moral basis of democracy. So what we know as democracy or descriptive democracy or explanatory democracy might be slightly void of the kind of democracy, the genuine democracy that actually is based on the moral aspects and the moral dimensions of democracy. So what is the moral base of democracy? Well, the moral base of democracy is that it's a superior form of government, and we know that at least in the modern era, in the last century or so, the countries that have been managed, organized, and governed democratically, they have been able to generate more wealth, distribute more wealth, and empower their populations, their citizens, more than the nations that did not have democratic systems of government. Therefore, there is a moral undertone embedded in democracies. So before I go too far, because of the appearance of China on the scene of the international politics, the modern China, the China of the last 4 decades, the China that has actually reformed itself. At least half of its system of government, half of the structure of its government has been reformed. Specifically, they have adopted the free market but dictatorial politics. And they've been able to kind of keep these two antagonistic branches of government together. And the miracle of China really goes back to that free part of Chinese society and the Chinese government. The opening up of the democracy and allowing the democratic activities and economic activities to be subject to the free markets and the free interaction between the forces of market has really created this magnificent economic growth that we all have observed in case of China. So so that begs the question of the creation of wealth that we have observed in the democracy in the Chinese government in the last 4 decades. Does that serve the cause of that moral institution, that foundation of democracy that we said it's the underlying tone of any democracies. We are going to get back to this because China is quite an exception, and we're going to deal with the exception after we laid the foundation for the general tone of our conversation. So we have to ask ourselves, why is democracy morally desirable? I mean, I can say that it's morally desirable because it's based on some moral principles that guide the institution building in democratic societies. We don't want, at this point, I don't want to implicate that democracy and morality are interchangeable. That's not my intention. We can confidently say that the democracy, what we call democracy, is truly liberal democracy, and we have not really been able to construct. By we, I mean human society on Earth has not been able to build a non-liberal democracy. There are those governments that their opponents, at least, they refer to them as illiberal democracies. And here we have to kind of focus on these two words of liberal and democracy. If we very simply define democracy as the government of people, elected by the people, and elected not only by the people, but in order to serve the people. If we define this as democracy, in other words, every citizen having the right, a system of government that protects the citizens' right to participate in the major decision making, or even minor decision makings, from the local governments all the way to the national governments. So that's the democracy part of the deal. But what about the liberal part? The liberal part really goes back to the principles of liberalism, and that principle is based on the underlying tone of that principle is that humans are born free and they are born with dignity, and no one can deny these so-called inalienable right from the citizens of a country, or for that matter from human being in general. This inalienable right is something that really, without acting as an adjective sitting next to democracy, it could really void democracy of its true meaning. In other words, it is possible to get the people in a country to vote against their own interests. There are many instruments in societies that are more powerful than the governments. You know, at least we all are familiar with one such system that has been very visible in the news, the Islamic Republic, and we see often that the officials of the Islamic Republic so proudly claim that no other country has held as many elections as they have, and which beg the question of what are the elections good for if there is no morality embedded into the foundation based on which those elections are designed and implemented. Therefore, democracy by itself, the fact that the people of a country can go and vote, and we all are familiar with the elections that Saddam Hussein held, where he came out of the ballot boxes with 98% favorite voting from elections. The elections of the Islamic Republic, the first election, the referendum of the Islamic Republic in Iran, around this time, some 40 years ago, which abolished the monarchy in Iran and established an Islamic Republic. That itself, I mean, from democracy point of view, which means providing conditions for everyone to go to the ballot boxes and cast their votes, that was, that opportunity was provided to a large majority of people. Although the final result was disputed by a lot of people, that wasn't really as overwhelmingly pro-Islamic Republic as they later claimed to be. But nevertheless, the fact that the people voted for something that they had no idea what it was is really at the heart of our conversation, at the heart of our mission of education and democracy and education of democracy. It's very important for people to be aware of what is that they're voting for. And in order for citizens, in order for making democracy meaningful, we need to put the adjective of liberalism next to it. In other words, the humans, the members of that society, the voters, have to be given certain inalienable right, that inalienable right cannot be denied by any power or any institution in the society, including the government, including the branches of government, or including institutions weaker or stronger than government, such as institutions of culture, institutions of religion, and other institutions. Therefore, those who claim that there are democracies of different type are really muddying the water in which we want to have clear in order to be able to see the bottom of the river, in order to know exactly how deep or shallow or the medium over which we are traveling is. Therefore, I'm going to concentrate my work and my conversation on liberal democracy, and I will save the time for another program to make a contrast and comparison between different democracies. Although I think that this comparison is really a misnomer to begin with. There are no different types of democracies. You have liberal democracy, which is the ultimate democracy, and then any other form of government, or the system of government that use the word democracy in their name are really taking advantage of the reputation and the popularity of the democracy as a system of government, and ultimately any such government, whether it's Democratic Republic of North Korea or People's Republic of China or Islamic Republic of Iran, any adjectives other than liberal democracy, or any philosophy, any underlying philosophy other than philosophy of liberalism, based on the dignity of human being and the inalienable rights of humans and the citizens, can void the democracy from its potency, from its capability, from its ability to establish, to serve its mission, the mission of its foundation, which is morality. And morality that is embedded in liberal democracies goes back to the philosophy of the inalienable rights. Those inalienable rights that are guaranteed in the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights are not just random words, random fancy words that have been selected by a group of elite and they are being indiscriminately thrown around. Those words mean something. Those are the results of hundreds, if not thousands, of years of human struggle for establishing a prosperous society for all humanity. And we eventually, when through the movement of enlightenment, when enlightenment came up with the idea of free man, and the fact that humans are free from the shackles of ideology, whether this ideology is sanctioned by religion or sanctioned by some other myth or some other principles, by some other cultures or human relations or social bindings, or whatever the cause and the philosophy of basically imprisonment and enslavement that has been observed to be the case in the past millennial history of humanity, through the movement of enlightenment and through the works of some people like John Locke and Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill, and David Hume and Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and all the Montesquieu and de Tocqueville, and they actually formulated, they extracted the golden recipe and the elixir of liberation of humanity, and they embedded it into very few precise and concise prescriptions, which ultimately manifested itself in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which at the bottom of it is human dignity. A dignity is a value, a status, an inalienable status with which every human being is born, and these humans, when a group of them choose to adopt a lifestyle and organize a society around that lifestyle, to every the system of government that to every member of that society assigns this right without condition, without any precondition. In that society, the external manifestation of the assignment of these rights is a set of practices and rituals such as voting and candidacy, becoming a candidate and organizing society around that very same principle, that principle of human dignity. We can make a distinction between liberal democracy and other forms of government. I will not call them democracy to prevent confusion, as many people have been using this word democracy indiscriminately, and I refrain from doing that. So liberal democracy, so at the heart of liberal democracy is the idea of human dignity. Now, how do we go from human dignity to the formation of national government, to the topic of sovereignty, and from the topic of sovereignty, how do we go into the topic of international relations and the interaction between the governments of different countries and different nations? Well, so what we have found, so once we agree that human dignity is the most excellent notion and concept to form the foundation of modern societies, then we have to design a system of government that guarantees human dignity and is based on human dignity. This is a mutual relationship between the system of government and the notion of human dignity. The human dignity, the formula that modern societies have found is that the people who have a similar system of culture and tradition and language and geographic location, these people, if the net sum of the human dignity, of the individual human dignity, forms into, it manifests itself into a national entity we call national sovereignty. So the national sovereignty is really the net sum of the individual human dignities. Without human dignity, societies should not be given national sovereignty because of what happens to national sovereignty, which I'm going to get into in a minute. So the national sovereignty provides governments who receive this right, the right to national sovereignty, the right of representing the national sovereignty of a nation, is assigned to their representatives, so-called government, and this should be done in a social contract, as Jean-Jacques Rousseau says, right? In the social contract, the possession of individuals, the human dignity, the properties of individuals, the human dignity, is in a public and free contract, is assigned to the representatives in a temporary fashion, so that they can go around and use that right and do that luxury and that capability and that feature in their interaction with other governments, other nations, in order to protect and maximize those missions, the underlying mission, which is the moral mission of maximizing prosperity in the society. So you see that in this formula for modern government, going from human dignity, to national sovereignty, to representative government through a social contract, and then taking this infrastructure to the superstructure of the international relations. This is really what has been referred to as the New World Order. So the New World Order, at least in the civilized world, in the most advanced societies on Earth in the last century, has been based on this structure. And we have to see where this structure can be modified. Whether can we modify or can we meddle with any of these different layers of liberal democracy, of the organization of the liberal democracy, of the superstructure of liberal democracy? Can we replace human dignity with something else, with a different notion? In other words, instead of the human right, can we replace it with God's right, as Islamic Republic does? They believe that God is the creator of the universe, and us as its creatures, as his creation, us and the earth and the universe, we are subject to his will. Whether this will serves that ultimate purpose of establishing prosperous society on earth or not, the right of God trumps the right of man. The supremacy of dignity of God and the right of God over the right of man, over the dignity of man, justifies certain representatives of that creator who understand him better, who represent his book, who have been appointed by that God to interpret, to act as a go-between, as an intermediator between the creator and the creations and the humans. They are in the sole position, in the unique position of defining, interpreting the scripture, the word of God, and then enforcing the word of God and the right of God over the right of people. So you see, right there, when you replace human dignity as the cornerstone of this magnificent structure which we refer to as liberal democracy, when you just replace that brick, that cornerstone, the entire organization basically collapses. The difference between government organizations that are based on the notion of human dignity and those that are based on anything else, even a notion as God dignity or God's right, is the difference between the US government and the Islamic Republic of Iran, is the difference between the French government and the government of North Korea, is the difference between the government of England and the government of Islamic Republic of Afghanistan or Islamic Republic of Pakistan or the government of Saudi Arabia. Those differences they go back to exactly the difference between the notions, the underlying foundation over which the structure of government is based. Therefore, from this point of view, really the democratic theory really is defining a norm, is really becoming a normative democratic theory. Although normative democratic theory per se, in general, might not be a desirable structure, because there are certain aspects of society that really needs a certain structure that is not necessarily democratic. For instance, in the military, you cannot have a democratic structure because the military has a very narrow mission, and within the mission, because of the very unique nature of that mission, democratic relationship cannot create a unique and powerful machine to be able to serve its mission. Or perhaps in the structure of a football team, there should be a hierarchy of command, and this hierarchy of command must be obeyed in order for those group of people to be able to serve the mission, and that within the mission really lies a certain norm, that those norms are not necessarily compatible with the norms of democratic societies, which is maximizing prosperity of people. So maximizing the prosperity of nations, and the model that has come on top, as I said, in the last 150 years, is liberal democracy, and at the bottom, at the foundation of the liberal democracy, is human dignity. And now, I think I've said enough about at least a very superficial comparison between the philosophical foundation of liberal democracy and other forms of government, other political theories, and political models, government models. Here I want to spend maybe 10 minutes to talk about what are the basis of human dignity, why all humans have the dignity that we alluded to earlier. The fact that every human being is born free and must be live free, and those are the rights, the right to life, and the right to pursuit of happiness, and the right to property. It cannot be denied by anyone from that individual. So these rights, these inalienable rights, that together they form the human dignity. Maybe in a later program we're going to say what is the utility of these rights when an individual is given these rights, how that person can be empowered. Actually, in a very short sentence, I can tell you that the empowerment that the guarantee of those three rights can bring to humans, the three pillars of human dignity can bring to humans, those rights are their ability to empower humans is very well manifested in the empowerment, in the way that the democratic governments and the democracies, the liberal democracies, really constantly produce free and powerful citizens who constantly, through a free practice of promoting individual rights and individual interests, they excel, and through their excellence, they benefit the society. And this is the way that society can maximize its profit, can maximize the collective prosperity, by allowing the nature given rights and potentials that is embedded, that is gifted to every child born, every human child born on this planet. Those capabilities, those potentials are hidden. And I think there's plenty of studies, psychological studies, social studies, that shows that children, if the children of certain disenfranchised and disfavored culture or economic situations, if they're taken out of that disfavored relationships and put into into an environment more conducive to education and the promotion of the potentials, they would be able to actually step up to the plate and develop their potentials very similar to the citizens of the most advanced society. So those are the examples of the fact that human dignity is really based on some natural reality, natural facts of the human beings being born, being given, being the heir to a glorious relationship, a glorious evolutionary and long process, that through this evolutionary process, humans have been trusted and they have been gifted with this potential. But at the time of birth, this thing is only a potential. The environment required for this potential to manifest itself, to materialize itself, to realize itself, is a democratic environment. An environment that is conducive to education, to promotion of individual rights, to promotion of right to free interaction between human beings, and as I said, the free promotion of their individual interests. Under those circumstances, this gift of nature, which is the potentials hidden in every child born alive, that can excel and can materialize and turn into skills over most of the time over the first 2 decades or over 2.5 decades of life. And through the process of materialization or conversion of this hidden potential to visible skills, society benefits. Society benefits from converting a child, a newborn, into a skilled tennis player. Society benefits from converting a child, upbringing a child, a baby, into a biochemist who can unravel the secrets of DNA and shed our phobia and our fear about the mysteries of diseases. Where the germ theory, which is the achievement of one human being, one child who grew up through a favorable educational and upbringing environment that resulted into his understanding, his skills to be able to unravel the structure of DNA. That's the way the society can benefit. Every time potentials are turned into skills, we can unravel one of the mysteries of nature. And as we overcome and surmount these mysteries of nature, through overcoming mysteries of nature, we make life on this planet more hospitable to a larger and larger group of people. So this is the evolutionary foundation of human dignity. The reason why we assign human dignity is because really the what we call human dignity is a code name for those potentials with which every human being is born. And we don't need to have the babies take a test to know which babies have that human dignity and that potential and which babies don't. Because there are plenty of instances and examples and studies in the past that basically all human beings have more or less the same potentials, and given the right and appropriate environments, they can really maximize, they can achieve, they can materialize, they can realize their potentials into a very sophisticated skill, and that skill becomes beneficial to the society at large. So these relationships between the nature-laden potentials endowed to every human being and the necessary environment in order to convert that to skill is really what the secret that all the free societies have discovered, and they've been able to establish exactly that society, that kind of free society appropriate for the nourishment of human potentials, and the empowerment of their citizens, empowerment of the individual members of their society has collectively created some of the best societies that humanity has ever seen, going back to as far as the history, the recorded history can tell us. Therefore, I think it's very important at this point to review what we said in the last 50 minutes. The fact that what we call democracy is based on certain foundation. The foundation that individuals in a society are in charge and in control, and must be in charge and control of their own destiny. They should be, when it comes to organizing the society and giving exclusive rights to an entity called government, specifically the right of use of violence, the right of collection of taxes, and the right of imposition of laws. In order to receive these laws, the individuals have to be treated freely and have to be given the free access and equal access to participation in the process that ultimately forms their governments. And we said that the foundation of this political theory, although it's it's not really normative, but it's really based on the norm of morality, and this morality can really be very crudely referred to as scientific morality, a morality that's based on the hidden potentials of humans that necessitates his or her treatment with dignity. And it's based on that dignity of each individual that we have, in the last 300 years, we have been able to construct tools and means for organizing societies around that very principle, around human dignity and human potentials. And based on that, as I said, we defined the right of national sovereignty, and the national sovereignty has been used, at least in the modern time, to empower the representatives of nations to deal with the representatives of other nations. And even at that level, there is a certain degree of the governmental dignity. We are giving even set governments, small and large, rich and poor, powerful and weak. We are moving towards institutions that are treating even the governments on equal basis. For instance, if you go to the United Nations, every member of the United Nations, regardless of their economic power, regardless of their area, regardless of their military power, and regardless of their geographic location, they are basically given a right to vote. Although there are some undemocratic structures like National Security Council that superpowers are imposing their wills in a slightly unfair way. But even that National Security the Security Council of the United Nations, UN Security Council, has 5 permanent members, which are the superpowers, the big powers, and then 15 members that are rotational every 2 years, and small and large countries indiscriminately become members of the UN Security Council. So we can see that this concept of human dignity that's really based on the latest findings of the human potentials and the science of human biology and human mind and human capabilities has empowered us to even build organizations, institution building on the image of the human dignity and the relationship between human dignity and sovereignty. So I expect that this model, even though these days, as I said at the beginning of this talk, kind of question has been found to have some rivals, and at least the Chinese model, the so-called Chinese model, is claiming rivalry and some potency compared to the liberal democracy. But in the future programs, we're going to say what are the flaws with the Chinese model and how we can reinforce the liberal democracies in a way that we can even benefit from the appearance of the Chinese model on the scene. And that, I think, is a good segue for our next program. And I will stop here, and we'll pick it up next time, talking about the philosophical foundation of the Chinese model and why is it not democracy, even though by some of its supporters is called people's democracy. We will make a distinction between people's democracy and liberal democracy, and which one is more appropriate for which country, specifically what elements and what factors can shake the cores of the democracy in this country, and how we can prevent our democracy from being subjected to some kind of structural uncertainties that we observed in the last 2-3 years, and build a democracy in a way that was meant to be, in other words, the guarantor in a system of organizing people in a way that they can maximize their ability to build a prosperous society on Earth. And I'm going to stop here, and thank you very much for your attention.